is one of the senior researchers, but in many ways, he also has shaped much of the narratives about the Arab American National Museum does, the interaction with the community. He leads a wonderful city walk, I think, or kind of exploration of the city, food and groceries and various places around Dearborn, Michigan, where the museum is based. And again, I'm not kidding, if you really want a slice of the Middle East in America, go to Dearborn. I mean, slice in every real sense, slice in figurative sense, and slice in a real sense, in which you get excellent food. But it's a fantastic place. Anyway, so Matthew's work has focused primarily on food studies and its role in American society, but also specifically, obviously, with Lebanese and Syrian Arab food, and its role in shaping the community and how people perceive the community. So please join me in welcoming Matthew to the podium.
Thank you, everybody. Georgetown County Public Library for putting this together. As everyone's been saying, it's extremely important when local communities take charge of their own history. Because I'm based in a national institution, and we can't tell the national story unless the people in the localities are doing the work that we can pull from to make a national story. So everything you're doing here, I will take back to Dearborn, and we'll make sure it becomes a part of the Arab American National Museum as well. So there are people out there who are interested in your stories, and we host scholars and researchers from all over the world who come to the museum, and they want to know how they can get the history of the communities, and so now we know where to send them when they need information about history in South Carolina. So my migration story is my mother's grandparents came from Amun, Lebanon, and settled in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. And many of them worked in the factories, but also many of them opened stores. And when I was born, most of the Lebanese folks in Johnstown owned bars and taverns. That was the little niche that they had in my hometown. And so I grew up going to bars for all of our family parties, Christmas parties, they were all in bars. So I'm no stranger to a bar. But today I'm going to talk about Lebanese American restaurants. And in the United States, and it's been this way for close to a century, the way we learn about other cultures is usually through their food. It's very time-consuming to learn a language. We are kind of stuck in our religious beliefs, so we don't really want to explore other religions that often. As Americans, we really don't know what's going on in the rest of the world, politically or historically, but we can go to a restaurant and we can learn a lot about a culture from their food. We've been doing that for about a century. I'm going to explore the ways that Lebanese folks capitalized on that, figuratively and literally, making money off of this idea that Americans wanted to learn about other cultures through food. The first ways that Lebanese folks made money off of food was selling to their own community. When they arrived in the United States, they tried to establish houses of worship, they established their own businesses, but they needed places to go to experience the food, especially because some of the earliest migrants were mostly single men, and so they needed to go to places where they could experience food from the homeland. So the earliest restaurants and coffee houses that we have record of, and these are both in New York. Most of my talk will be about New York City's Little Syria, which thank you, Elizabeth, for establishing that context, and also in Dearborn and Detroit because of this large concentration, but I make references to other parts of the country. So the first places to open food establishments that were owned and operated by Syrian or Lebanese folks were really only for Syrian and Lebanese folks. They probably didn't have menus. If they did have menus, they were in Arabic. This first coffee shop here is one of the earliest known coffee shops, Hadu Shimshim, or Shishim, on Washington Street. 1892 it opened, so very early. And these were holes in the wall. They were places that had a few tables and a counter where you would order mostly coffee, some Arabic sweets. They might have had small platters of like cheese and bread kind of thing, but these weren't like fine dining establishments. On the right, it's one of the earliest known menus that have been saved. This is at the New York Public Library. They have a huge menu collection. It's really fun if you go on their website. You can see menus from all over the country. They have thousands and thousands of menus And this is the only Syrian-American one they have, though, that focuses on Syrian food. And you can see the menu. Some things you'll recognize. You'll see the leaven, they call it sour milk was the translation. You see the item, you've got the grape leaves, the moussaka, the eggplant, soup, rice, stews, the string beans with lamb. And then they have the intestines that they call craps, which I'm assuming is how somebody explained it in English. Like, how do you say the stuff on the inside of your stomach? Oh, the crap. Yeah, that's what we're going to serve. Very appetizing. I would love to try that. But this, even though this has the English translation, this restaurant was really intended for the community. Oftentimes these coffee houses were attached to boarding houses or small hotels that almost all Syrian, only Syrian clientele came to, so they really weren't interested in attracting non-Arabic speaking folks, which is, you can tell from the exterior, so there's Arabic script on the exterior, kind of wouldn't be inviting to a lot of folks in New York City. Elizabeth put this picture up. It's one of the few pictures we have of, from the time period inside of these cafes. You can see they're all men. They're not really eating food. They're smoking nargile and they're drinking their kahwa or tea, playing cards, backgammon, all the things you would associate with a group of men hanging out in a cafe in an immigrant enclave. And so this cafe culture was quite important. It was their chance to come and talk politics. These were all men who were probably either business owners or movers and shakers. They could have also been factory workers. But anyway, this is what they did. They would go and they would hang out. But again, this cafe was not intended for non-Syrian or Lebanese folks to come to. It's not that people weren't welcome, it was just, they didn't expect it. They wouldn't have advertised for it. They really just wanted to serve their own community. But eventually, you need to start making more money. You need to start reaching a larger community. And so how do you do that? So we're looking at New York City. New York City was really what the restaurants were doing in New York City spread to the rest of the country. The kind of ways that the community in New York was starting to advertise their food and bring non-Arabic speaking folks in did set a tone for the rest of the country. So it kind of starts with this idea of like bohemian writers, journalists, intrepid folks who want to discover the exotic would travel to the lower Manhattan and visit these dingy little holes in the wall. And this is one account of an interviewer sitting down with O. Henry, very famous American author, talking about one of the few places in New York where you can make real Syrian food, this dirty, dingy hole that needs disinfection much more than business. But they loved it. A little thing like an unpleasant odor did not disconcert O. Henry. He was looking for atmosphere. That's certainly what he got in this cafe. This is from 1920, but even a few years earlier, you could start seeing in the newspapers titles like "A Little Bit of the Exotic," down the street, down Washington Street, come experience the old world. And so the restaurants started to realize, they started seeing a lot more non-Arabic speaking folks. And they probably started thinking, okay, I should probably have some English translations. Maybe I should clean up a bit around here, maybe paint the outside. Maybe I should rename the restaurant. And we'll talk about how the restaurants will be named later. Because up until the early 1900s, the restaurants were just called like, Tanusa's Coffee House, or The Coffee House, or Lebanese Cafe. They didn't really have the kind of names for restaurants that we have today in many cases. So what ways did the Lebanese folks really cash in on how they were seen by Americans? They were seen as exotic. This is a time, even today, the Lebanese folks here know, when you tell somebody down here that you're Lebanese, they tell them, oh wow, I've never met anybody who's Lebanese or an Arab or whatever. Imagine 100 years ago, it was probably even more exotic. And so they knew that, and they really tried to cash in on it. And some ways that they did that was establishing these connections to the Bible. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, Americans were fascinated with the Holy Land and Palestine. And they were taking trips to the Holy Land, these pilgrimages to Palestine and Jerusalem. And people were traveling the country giving lectures about the Holy Land. And also at the same time, you have Armenians escaping genocide from Greater Syria, from the Turks, coming to New York, and the newspapers with these big headlines, Armenians escaping the Mohammedans, escaping slaughter. And you've got these Syrian and Lebanese Christians who are like, oh wow, the Armenians are getting a lot of sympathy for their escape from the Muslims. We should also play that up. We should also be like, hey, well, we also escaped the Muslims, right? Even though, as Dr. Crafter said last night, that really wasn't the case, but they knew that it was getting them sympathy, and so they used that. But the biblical connection was big. So this is from a 1904 article. This intrepid discoverer travels down to the colony of Syrians made up not of Mohammedans, as they called Muslims in the day, but of Christians. And says they were converted to Christianity, which we know isn't true, that Christianity was formed in this area. So the idea of converting from Islam to Christianity was not the case. But you can see they say things like, a Syrian dinner in Brooklyn is lacking in the outer and aesthetic beauty of one serves at the biblical town of Mount Lebanon, but the food is the same. And I'm talking about this biblical connection and does it the whole way through. In 1939, there's a guidebook to New York that says the Syrian food, the restaurants of the Sheikh and the son of the Sheikh, which I'll talk about later, specialize in biblical foods, which I'm not even sure what that is. Loaves and fishes, I guess, were being served, and red wine. But this idea that, like, if you go and eat there, it's like you're having a meal with Christ, I assume. I don't know. And then down here, there's this pastry shop that says the candy is being made with utensils similar to those used in biblical time. I don't remember the candy makers in the Bible, but maybe they're there in a chapter I didn't really read closely. But they really played this up. And then a really popular book, Ellen Corey was a very popular food author in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and she had a book, Food from Biblical Lands, about the Syrian food you can recreate in the United States. And so this biblical connection was the beginnings of the community understanding that they had something special to sell, something to offer, and that's how they could bring people to the restaurants. Then something else develops. Along with this fascination of the Holy Land, there's a huge fascination with Egypt. In 1922, they discover King Tut's tomb, and a little bit after that, they start traveling the artifacts, and if you think of like Art Deco decor, it has a lot of Egyptian inspiration. So Egypt was very popular in the United States in the 20s, the Egyptian style. And so these Lebanese immigrants were like, we can say we're like representing Egyptian culture, and they did that. Also, what was really fascinating, and this is in Linda Jacobs' book, and I highly recommend if you're interested in Little Syria, New York, this early Lebanese Syrian immigrants to the U.S., she has a book called Strangers in the West. You can find it online. It has hundreds of pictures, archives that only she has access to. I drew some of my information from there. It's a fascinating read. If you really want to know, and she focuses really on like 1890 to like 1910, so really early, to see how the community was established. Strangers in the West, I highly recommend her book. But in the first, real interaction between Arab culture in the United States that, as far as like in a commercial context, was the Chicago World's Fair in 1892 and the Columbus Exposition. And all these vendors and merchants and performers come from Arab world to Chicago. And the fair was failing financially, it was not doing well, except for Cairo Street, which is this recreation of all these different Arab performers and merchants. It was the most popular thing at the entire World's Fair in Chicago. And so a lot of the merchants from there ended up in Little Syria and stayed and opened stores and kind of recreated the fascination with Cairo and Arab worlds. And so you have a lot of Lebanese-owned restaurants and bakeries in the early 1900s that called themselves Cairo or the Pyramids or the Egyptian Bakery, even though these were Lebanese-owned places, because they were really smart and they knew what was going to bring in the Americans, and so they really played on that. This is in my hometown. This is kind of like a bar. It's not even like a restaurant. it's like a bar in an event space, and it was called the Pyramids. And there's a camel, you can't see this little camel on the logo here, but it was owned by Lebanese immigrants. But again, playing up this idea that, okay, people might not know Lebanon, but they know the pyramids, they know Egypt, and so we'll bring people in that way. But what really kicked off Arab Americans, especially Lebanese folks, selling their food and culture to a general public was this film, The Sheikh, in 1921, which comes out starring Rudolph Valentino, who was the big Hollywood heartthrob of the time. And so you've got this movie, which he plays this Arab sheik who abducts this blonde white woman. It's a great movie, you should try to find it. It's a silent film. And so so everybody's fascinated with the sheik and Arab culture, or at least as Arab culture is understood through Hollywood's eyes, which we know isn't actually how Arab culture was at the time. But Lebanese folks were really smart. And so this restaurant here at 87 Washington Street, from like about 1910 through the 1920s, was known as the Kardahi Brothers Restaurant. But a few years after The Sheik comes out, they changed their name to The Sheik Restaurant. Right, so it goes from Kardahi Brothers to The Sheik. And so follows many other restaurants across the nation. Miami had a Sheik restaurant in the 40s, Detroit had one in the 20s and 30s, there was one in San Francisco. And so this idea that, oh, Americans think the Sheik is cool, well, if we name our restaurant The Sheik, they're gonna come, but they're gonna think this is the authentic food that, the Sheik would have eaten in the movie. And so they did that very well, and this restaurant, the Sheik restaurant, and various forms of it, there was an offshoot called The Son of the Sheik, which was also a Rudolph Valentino film from 1926. It was the sequel to The Sheik. But the Sheik restaurant in New York had a very long life. It lived on in various forms through the 1960s or 70s. So it was like, and it was the original family. This is a picture of the Sheik himself, one of the Kardahi brothers, who put on this wonderful outfit, and they had a big painting of him in that outfit in the restaurant. So he really played up the Sheik reference. But it went all over New York City, started in Little Syria, ended up eventually on Fifth Avenue. And so for a New York City restaurant to have like a 60, 70-year legacy is pretty amazing. And you can see the menu. It served exotic pastries, right? Exotic to who, right? It wouldn't be exotic to the Lebanese and Syrian community. It would have been pastries. They wouldn't have called it exotic. But what they were serving is not the fine dining that you saw even in the 1917 menu, where it's more entrees. It's like the shish kebab and items that you would normally consider like street food, things that you would grab very quickly. But that's what the American public was fascinated with the most. If you ask people now what their favorite Lebanese food, they're rarely going to say like eggplant or lamb stew. They're going to say falafel, shish kebab, hummus, like the really fast, easier things. And that's the kind of dining then that was really, people really took to. And that's what most restaurants now model most Lebanese restaurants model themselves more off of this kind of menu than the earlier kind. There's also a famous Sheik in Jacksonville, Florida, featuring the camel rider sandwich, which I just love that. So there's a bit of, like think of this working the other direction. If a non-Arab restaurant called themselves the Sheik and had a camel rider sandwich, we would all be, oh, this is racist, this is awful. But when the Lebanese folks do it, we kind of see it as tongue-in-cheek because they're poking fun at the stereotypes. I mean, these folks, this restaurant was opened in the 70s by a set of brothers. They didn't think they were sheiks. They knew this wasn't the real Arab culture, but they knew it's what the public liked. And also, in the 70s, and earlier, to call your restaurant an Arab restaurant, or the Middle East restaurant, or the Lebanese restaurant, might drive people away. Because in media and popular culture, those were negative terms. Arabs were the ones who were, blowing up airplanes, and Lebanese were the ones who were at civil war with each other, Muslims and Christians. So you didn't want to make that connection because it would scare people away, especially in smaller towns and rural communities. So they had to announce that they were serving exotic food, but in a way that didn't scare people away. And they used it through this legacy of this at this point, 50-year-old Hollywood movie that most people don't even remember, but that legacy of the sheep lives on. Even more popular than Hollywood and the Sheik and the biblical connection, though, is the connection through 1001 Nights, Arabian Nights, Ali Baba, Sinbad, Aladdin. These are the stories that in the United States at the time that Lebanese folks were really starting to come here at the turn of the 20th century. Most Americans knew these stories. They might not know the real history of the countries, but they knew Aladdin, Sinbad, Ali Baba. They heard them in school. They had the picture books as children. Very well-known tales. And the Lebanese immigrants knew that. And so if you call your restaurant Ali Baba, people will know what that is. They'll want to come because it's a fascinating thing to connect food and these exotic people living down the street from you to this story that you remember from your youth. And so to do that was really powerful. In fact, I would say that Ali Baba and Aladdin are two of the most popular names for Lebanese, Syrian, and broader Arabic restaurants in the United States. I'm trying to do, if I could just find some time to do the project, no one will take me seriously, I want to find all the Aladdin restaurants in the US. So far I know there's one in at least almost 40 states, and there's probably one in every state. I'm trying to prove that there's an Aladdin restaurant owned by Lebanese or Syrian folks in every state of the US to show how ubiquitous this idea that, when you're Lebanese and you open a restaurant, some people call it a Lebanese restaurant, of course, but a lot of people are like, what's really going to set us apart from all the other restaurants on the street? We want people to know that we have something that you can't find anywhere else, and calling it Aladdin and having a magic lamp on your menu or on your sign really lets people know that you're offering something you can't get at any other restaurant in town. So it was a really good way to set yourself apart. And it wasn't just the name, it was the decor. A lot of restaurants would have these palace-looking windows. This is in 1994 in Dearborn. Talal's Lebanese immigrant guy serving Lebanese food, but it looks more like something out of a Hollywood movie. And this also in the 60s in Metro Detroit, the Ali Baba Cocktail Lounge. I mean, isn't that an amazing facade? I really wish that was still around. They had the Oasis room in the basement. Really luxurious setting. And it's and you can find these everywhere. You can find these restaurants are still, sometimes they're recent immigrants. They're not always Lebanese, sometimes they're Yemeni or Egyptian, but they know that the history is there in the United States, that there's been restaurants called Ali Baba, and so they're like, oh, well that worked, I'll do it again. I'll also call my restaurant Ali Baba. And so that's the legacy that these early Lebanese folks have left. But we also know that many Lebanese folks opened restaurants that didn't serve Lebanese food, as here in Georgetown with Thomas Cafe. It was more of lunch counter, right? More of American food. And that's how probably a third or maybe even half of Lebanese folks that opened restaurants, much like Greek folks, served, chili dogs and sandwiches, because that's where the money was. Workers weren't coming off their factory shift looking for falafel and hummus, right? They wanted the meat and potatoes kind of American meal. And so if you opened a restaurant serving ethnic food in certain cities, you're going to go out of business very quickly. So they knew that they wanted to make money, they needed to sell what was seen as American food. And so this is a really early restaurant in 1906, 1907 called Khalil's in New York City, and it was really popular. And you can see by their postcard, they were really trying to establish themselves as this really elegant place to eat. They have this oyster and clam special luncheon. There's not a single oyster cocktail a la Khalil, right? Really trying to show that they're doing the fanciest foods they can do for a New York City crowd. There's nothing Arab really on here. Maybe some of the ingredients had some certain spices in it, but from the menu, there's nothing Lebanese or Arabic about the food. And like I said, there's also that legacy. Like all the bars and taverns that I grew up in Pennsylvania, none of them served. They all served burgers and fries. Nobody served Lebanese food. But at home, that's what they were cooking and making. But they knew that probably wouldn't sell very well in a factory town. And so depending on where Lebanese folks settled, the kind of clientele they expected to come, that's how they marketed their restaurant. That's the kind of food that they sold. But for the last 125 years in the U.S., Lebanese folks have dominated not just the food, as I'll show you in a little bit, focusing on Dearborn, but not just the restaurants, but grocery wholesale. And certain cities were completely run, and to this day are completely run by Lebanese immigrants or the descendants of Lebanese immigrants. Liquor stores were huge, bars and taverns, gas stations, convenience stores, meat places, bakeries. Lebanese folks really got their hands in the food industry, not just in Lebanese-based foods, but in all over, all different kinds of cuisines. So I want to focus in on Lebanese food in Dearborn and Detroit because it is a very unique community. It's extremely large and very diverse, and per capita has the highest concentration of Arabic-speaking folks anywhere in the country. Majority Lebanese and Syrian, and although that's changing, we're getting more Iraqi and Yemeni and Egyptian immigrants, but it's majority Lebanese, and that's how it was established. Lebanese food is at the heart of all of the culinary traditions in Dearborn and Detroit. And so Dearborn, as a city, is about 100,000 people. About 60,000 of them are Lebanese, Syrian, or Yemeni. So about 60% of this major American city now are people who are either immigrants or descendants of Arabic-speaking immigrants. So that's a lot, right? I mean, that's a big community. And this is a map that we created at the museum, and this is just a taste, and this is just like 1 or 2 square mile area of Dearborn. But this street right here, Warren Avenue, and all these little dots are just food-related Lebanese-owned businesses. You could probably double or triple just that stretch. This more than 100 Lebanese food establishments in Dearborn, Detroit is very conservative. I actually haven't sat down and counted them all, but it's got to be well over 100. And when I say 100, I mean 100 that serve Lebanese food, not just places owned by Lebanese folks, but like this is where you go to get your manaish and your shawarma and all that stuff, and your groceries and your lamb, your raw lamb for your kibbeh. So it's really highly concentrated. So like Dr. Khater said, yes. Oh, 5 minutes late. No, they're saying hello. Like you said, if you take the plane trip, and there's a direct, Spirit flies direct from Myrtle Beach to Detroit. That's how I got here. Dearborn's about a 15-minute drive from the airport. And you spend a few weeks traveling Dearborn and eating at all the different restaurants. Well, let's take you on a tour. So, this is one of the classic Lebanese restaurants, Habib's Cuisine in East Dearborn. And here we've got a beef shawarma with the pickles and the garlic sauce and all that good stuff. But their specialty is the potato balls. These little spicy, roasted in tons of maybe clarified butter, I think. These little spicy potato balls that are just fantastic. They have a crunch on the outside, but they're all potato. Yeah, they're amazing. And so that's like, I don't know where that comes from, but that's like a Lebanese thing in Dearborn, these potato balls. All the restaurants try to have them. It's not something you're going to travel to Beirut and ask for the potato balls, but it's definitely a Lebanese American thing in Dearborn. One of the bakeries, Leban Sweets, offers a very unique Lebanese breakfast, which is kanafa bakak, which is a big hunk of kanafa inside of a bun covered in sesame seeds. I think it's like 7,000 calories for breakfast. I have yet to be able to finish one. They're huge. But people eat this for breakfast. At breakfast time, you go to this bakery and people are lined up to get their kanafa bakak. Very unique kind of dessert. I see it as a dessert. Some people see it as breakfast. That's okay. It's up to them. But just another kind of unique thing you can find in Dearborn. You go across the street from Les Bonnes, and you end up in Chatila. Chatila, very well known across the U.S. They ship anywhere. If you really want some of their sweets, they'll FedEx them to you, fairly reasonably priced. You can go online and order them. And they have this really beautiful, large, expansive place that sells all these different Middle East sweets, and they make all of them daily at their large factory down the street. They also have a huge case on the other side of French-based pastries, which shows this history of like French colonialism of Lebanon. So a really beautiful place to go and visit and spend time. And they ship their ubiquitous, like reddish, purplish boxes. They ship them all over the country. Then you walk about a block and a half from Chatila, and you go to Golden Bakery to get the fresh manaish that they make there. Cheese pies, the za'atar, and the meat pies, and they're like $1 a piece. And they're coming out of the oven one after another. You just stand there and you can smell it like a block away. And there's probably a dozen bakeries just in Dearborn that do these fresh manaish all day, sometimes late into the night. And so, things that you just can't replicate in a grocery store or something. You don't want to go buy 4-day-old za'atar pies from Walmart that have been shipped from Dearborn to there. It just wouldn't taste the same. You need to get them fresh. The grocery stores, there's many large grocery stores that serve all kinds of Arab American goodies. These are all different kinds of pickles, the pickled turnips and pickled cauliflower and the pickles themselves, Lebanese pickles, just on one of their bars that they have at this big grocery store called Dearborn Fresh. And there's a handful of grocery stores around Dearborn like this. They also do everything from start to finish. So the vast majority of people in Dearborn are Muslim, Lebanese and Yemeni Muslim, and so they need all their meat to be halal, which means it has to be raised and butchered in a certain way, and so there's a lot of halal butchers. This is in Eastern Market in Detroit. Saad Meats, his father, Lebanese immigrant, started this meat industry. They provide meat to all kinds of different restaurants in Metro Detroit, but it's all halal. And this is actually the store. But this isn't behind the scenes. This is where you go in to buy the meat. Is like they're butchering it right there. There's packages back here. Behind me, you can see you can get a lamb's head for $3. Just laying in this bin, you just go and pick up your lamb's head, take it and buy it. That's the kind of operation. There's a few butcher shops like this in Metro Detroit. Really fascinating to go into because you see the Muslim community needs their meat to be halal, so the cheapest thing is to do it themselves. And they are very good at it. And then other unique things is there's Hashem's. They roast their own coffee, they roast their own cardamom, and they roast their own spices and everything, and so they make Arabic coffee like you've never even dreamed. So fresh, you can smell it. When they're roasting, you can smell it. Many blocks away, and you go in and you talk to Adam, and he inherited the business from his father. It's been there for 20, 30 years, and so they have all these wonderful spices and coffees that they do. Really just, start to finish, you can walk through Dearborn and see everything you need to see and everything you could possibly want to eat. I'll finish on talking about the legacy is that the future is quite strong. You've got, Dr. Crafter took a bunch of us in April. We had a food conference and we went to City in Raleigh. And it's a fine dining experience. This is a place that people make reservations to go to on the weekend for special occasions. Just amazing food. I was blown away. And the fascinating thing about it is the chef is Mexican. But the chef learned to cook from City, right, from the grandmother. And it shows you that, the food is so powerful that the food will continue as long as the people who are trained to do it are trained by the right folks. So the future is bright. I don't think the Lebanese are going to lose their traditions at any time soon. There was also a lot more national recognition about Middle Eastern food in the U.S. El Amir, one of the staple restaurants in Dearborn, was given a James Beard American Classics Award a few years ago, really showing that major institutions are recognizing that Lebanese food has contributed a lot to our nation and that the food is a very unique cuisine that is being co-opted. You can buy hummus at any grocery store and who knows what manufacturing place is making this hummus, and that's something that the Lebanese brought with them that is being co-opted. So it's good to recognize the original folks that brought it to us. So with that, I'll end. I think there's some time for questions.
If you weren't hungry, I think by now you're starving. And this is like, the Dearborn Bureau of Tourism also kind of talk with the Raleigh thrown in every now and then. Let's open up for questions and answers for about 15 minutes.
Yes.
A few years ago, I was in New York, and I was taken one evening to, I guess, the Mideastern section, and all it was restaurants and grocery stores.
In Brooklyn, right?
I don't
Atlantic
know.
Avenue in Brooklyn?
It was a New Yorker that took me, and I don't know.
Yeah.
Is that where it is?
Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn is today like the heart of
And what's the name of it?
Atlantic Avenue.
Okay, but it was not very modern-ish looking. It was very, like maybe when my grandparents came over, but the
Yeah.
restaurants were, inside were, they were very nice, but not like white tablecloths and chairs. It was, I felt like I was in the Mideast.
Yeah, so Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn is, that was part of Little Syria. Little Syria was Lower Manhattan, but then also this part of Brooklyn. And it's been changing over since about the 80s, where it wasn't just Lebanese and Syrian. A lot of the cafes are actually owned by Yemeni and Egyptian folks, and even Moroccan now. But yeah, the storefronts still kind of look the same, even though the inside might not be the same. They're still immigrant restaurants, but they're different generations of immigrants.
And a lot of people on the street still had the long robe, and they
Oh, yeah.
looked at us, at me, as if I was, what are you doing here?
Yeah, if you go to Dearborn, especially on Friday, when people are going to Friday prayers, you'll see a lot of men wearing white mustaches and walking down the streets, and
Yeah.
Women are wearing all different sorts of their cultural traditions, robes, and different hijabs and head coverings.
So it's in Brooklyn.
Yeah, so Brooklyn, that's the main heart of Arab America in New York City today. Yes.
Yeah, that's where my mother and her sister, every time they came to visit us in New Jersey, they went to Atlantic and Brooklyn. I never, before the other speaker and yourself, heard about the area in Lower Manhattan, which next time I go see my son, I will definitely be going there, because that seemed very interesting as well.
Yeah, so the area in Lower Manhattan, as Elizabeth was saying, is basically one building left. It's just a facade of a building. Because when they were building the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel in the 40s and 50s, they were basically using eminent domain and just kicking everybody out. So there really isn't anybody left because of the building, because the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel was built right through the community.
Is that what happened to Little Syria?
Yeah, that's what happened to the original Little Syria, was eminent domain. And then a couple decades later, when they were building the World Trade Center, just a few blocks north of that area, so everything just got basically demolished.
Have you seen the Marcus Samuel saying no passport?
Yes.
Segment on Dearborn?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah, he did a really good job. So you should, it's recent. You should try to find that. It's on PBS. I think it's online for free. Marcus Samuel said no passport required. It's the first episode they
It's
did,
worth it.
and they spent a lot of time in Dearborn and Metro Detroit checking out the community.
So also just a note, because of the New York, Manhattan, and Brooklyn connection, we have a project that is meant to actually capture the story, preserve that story. It's a digital humanities project where we map the community, so you can actually go on our website and you can go through various stages for the community, beginning in Washington Street, then when they meet to Brooklyn. And you can pretty much find out everybody who lived there, what they did, and so on and so forth. And it's our way of preserving that history that is disappearing very quickly.
Yeah, thank you. Anne, you had your hand?
Yeah, thank you. Well, three things. One, it was so exciting. We hosted a guest artist with our Middle Eastern Music Ensemble at William and Mary, and to thank us, he sent us a giant box from Shatila, right in Williamsburg, Virginia, and we just, squealed with delight. Secondly, I've spent a lot of time in the Gulf, and of course, it's Lebanese chefs who are in charge in the Gulf. I mean, there's not much of a cuisine in the Gulf, except for Lebanese cuisine. I mean, there is, but it's quite, regional and localized. So, I mean, it really is a global phenomenon. And then the question is, what brand of hummus do you recommend that we buy so that we are not patronizing faker hummus makers?
You're really going to get me into that.
I
I always check the box,
Yeah.
or check the package. If it was made in a city that has a large Lebanese population, I think you're safe. Like there's some that are made in like Toledo area in Ohio, which is very good. There's a large Lebanese population there. Like Rochester, some of the big manufacturers are like Rochester Hills. You know, it's tough because some of these places,
There's a lot of stuff.
but a lot of big corporations have been buying up some of these places and using their names, so you just don't know what you're gonna get sometimes. So I say you just either make it yourself, or you gotta find the local Lebanese grocer or restaurant and just get it from them. It's tough, yeah.
That's okay, just when I go to Trader Joe's, that's what.
Yeah.
Caroline?
I just have two things. One of them is my grandfather was had bars and restaurants all over Cleveland, and we have lots of original photographs.
Oh, wow.
So,
Yeah, that would be great.
so we can put those
Absolutely.
with you. The other thing is also about hummus. So this, my girls see the steam coming out of my ears when I go to Trader Joe's, and I see hummus, which is made with edamame leaves and
Oh, yeah, yeah.
like that's a bean dip.
Yeah.
And there must be a comment more than a question.
So get it out. We need
Or
to.
like a tirade.
Yeah.
There must be a movement or something to basically forbid the use of hummus to refer to anything other than hummus. with
Yeah.
chickpeas.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
But it just gets me very upset, and my girls laugh at me endlessly. They said, no, Mom, this is America, these things happen.
Yeah. I follow a lot of people on social media, a lot of Lebanese folks who, the trend now is dessert hummus, which is like chocolate hummus and so like, yeah, people will post these pictures, these Lebanese people will post like chocolate hummus and say, this is an act of terrorism. And they feel like their culture is being terrorized by dessert hummus. Yeah.
Well, to be fair, if you go to Lebanon, hummus has been transformed there as well. So, I mean,
Yeah.
so cuisine changes all the time as well. So I mean, I think there's an element of that as well. So
These be chickpeas.
I know, but I mean, you should see. I mean, especially with the influx of Syrian refugees,
Oh, yeah.
there's been an amazing cuisine explosion in Lebanon, including hummus that is much better than what I grew up with.
Yeah, the Syrians do the like red pepper paste.
Oh yeah, it's really good stuff.
Yeah.
So when I introduced Mary Lou into my family, Irish kids, right, they all looked at the hummus and went, ugh. And now they are hummus freaks. They have to have hummus all the time.
It's a great accompaniment, just about anything.
Yeah.
Matt, I got a three-part question.
Okay.
Do you cook, what is the most quintessential Lebanese dish? And if you were on a desert island, what Lebanese dish would you want to be with you?
I cook, but I don't even dare to cook Middle Eastern food because I could never match like my family growing up. So I haven't really gone down that route yet. My favorite dish? I don't know. I've been really into Yemeni food lately, which is fantastic. If you like lamb, Yemeni style lamb is like unbelievable. But so if I go to a Lebanese restaurant, I'm going to order like shish kafta. I really like a good grilled, like shish kafta is like the ground version of a shish kebab. I'll get like a shish kafta sandwich. I mean, you gotta get the kibinai, right? If you trust the restaurant, you don't just order, that's something you don't order just everywhere, the rock kibbeh, and that's not something you just want, I think they're doing okay back there. Yeah, I think the McDonald's version of rock kibbeh. If I could only eat one thing, I don't know. It'd probably be some version of lamb, because I think the Middle East folks do lamb much better than like the British version of lamb, which, that's like when I try to take people who don't know Middle Eastern food to a restaurant, and say we're gonna order lamb, in their head they're thinking like British style roast lamb, and they're like, oh, I don't want that. I'm like, no, trust me. This is very different, you will like it. And then I convert them to being lamb fans. So. One more question, or do we have to?
Yeah, we have time for a couple more
It's
questions.
really not a question, I just wanted to make a statement, which probably happened to a lot of us. When we were kids, we grew up, of course, on Lebanese food, and all these kids, everybody laughed at us at the food we ate. And now everybody eats.
It's true. Yeah, I heard stories of people like their parents would pack their lunch and they would get to school and open it, and all they wanted to be in there was peanut butter and jelly, but there was like, you know, za'atar and like, you know, leftover lamb and like grape leaves, and they're like, I wanted to just have peanut butter and jelly.
One last question.
So when you mentioned the Mexican chef, it reminded me, a colleague of mine who's actually Mexican-American. If I had heard that from a Lebanese, I would have been skeptical, but and since then I found some article about it somewhere. that the origins of the Mexican taco are actually from Lebanese immigrants to Mexico.
Taco al pastor.
Yeah,
Ah, okay.
Not all tacos, but al pastor,
Okay,
yes,
okay.
shawarma, shawarma.
yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, no, that is a good connection. And I know you were saying in Texas, a lot of the huge grocery stores
Yeah.
in like the Houston area are all owned by Lebanese folks. And so there's a lot more fusion cuisine happening down there as well, so.
Okay, one last question.
One last question, okay.
That's okay. I just remember growing up, my mother made us raw kidney on Sundays, and she made it for me, and it never made it to the dining room table because we were hovering around, grabbing and rolling up and eating it, and I thought nothing of it until, you know, you start meeting your friends, and they're like, you gotta be crazy to be eating raw meat.
Yeah.
And I just wondered, like, when they started saying that, like, what made us start eating the raw meat? I mean, really?
It's good.
Yeah,
And if you have it with Ara, you have nothing to
yeah,
worry
that's true,
about.
yeah. They'll kill all the germs.
Yeah, kill any germ. Ara will kill anything, you know. So it's-
I mean, most cultures have a version
Yeah.
of eating raw meat. It has to do with, you know, lack of refrigeration and preservation, and sometimes you gotta eat it right away.
Oh, we did.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, thank you so much, man.
Thank you.